Welcome to Season 5 of She Ventures. I am your host, Doria Lavanino. She Ventures is a podcast about women and their work and life pivots. I believe in the power of storytelling. I also believe that if you change one woman's life, you start to change a family or a community. Our mission is to elevate the diverse stories of everyday women in their work. One promise, no mansplaining ever. Sit back, listen, and hit subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us at sheventurespodcast.com. Fun fact, she was a Division I swimmer at the University of Vermont and started her career in sales. Her biggest achievement was growing a life science diagnostic company she led with angel funds, expanded it to more than 100 countries, and sold it to a multi-billion-dollar publicly held firm. During that 2.5-decade span, she started as director of marketing and rose to managing director of two separate businesses, obviously one acquired, where she oversaw $300 million division. Today, she is an entrepreneurial mentor, serves as an advisor, board member, contributes to Fast Company and TechCrunch in her free time, I guess, and also angel invests. Here to tell us about her journey and leave us with some key takeaways is Marjorie Radlo-Zandi. Marjorie, welcome to She Ventures.
Welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
It is really cool to have someone with your degree of experience on the show. I wanted to start with something I learned about you, which is that you were raised in a family of entrepreneurs. I was wondering how that shaped you growing up.
I think that it was usual to start your own business, expand into other businesses, that rather than really joining a company, rising through the ranks in corporate America, what was more usual is that you'd see a problem, see white space in a market, and go try to fix it by creating your own business or expanding the business that you had. So that's usual in our family. So that was just a matter of course.
Both your parents did that?
My father did that, and my mother was on the financial side of the business.
You were in Silicon Valley from 1983 to 1992, and you went at the time for your husband's work, but within 3 weeks, you had landed 15 offers yourself. What skills did you have that were in such high demand?
The skills were in terms of business development and expansion of markets, both domestically and internationally. I think the skills were in high demand, and it was a very, very hot time in Silicon Valley. The 15 offers surprised me as well.
I can imagine. Within 21 days, no less, right?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And I tend to think of, I'm from the West Coast originally, not from California, but I always thought of Silicon Valley as like starting in the 90s, but obviously it was way before then.
It absolutely was. Really starting with the semiconductors and Fairchild initially, and moving into Intel and all the different software companies and Apple and hardware companies, that's part of it. So it was very, very hot back then.
It was very hot. Do you think that being in business development, / sales at the beginning of your career helped you as an entrepreneur?
I do, because it really focused me and obviously the companies that I worked for and with on the customer. And the customer, without customers, without sales, you really don't have a business. So it was a hyper focus on that. And that's always helped me.
Amen to that. I think that sometimes that gets lost today in startups that focus on a lot of extraneous factors and not the customer. And that I think those are the ones that tend not to do quite as well. Another really interesting fact to me is that you were asked by Marc Andreessen to be employee number 3 at Mosaic, which was a precursor to Netscape. You were pregnant at the time, and you intuitively knew that you just weren't willing to put in those 80-hour weeks that the job would require. Does it ever bother you that by virtue of being pregnant, you passed up the offer? Obviously, I know I'm a mother myself, so it's not like a question like, are you sorry that you had your child? I know she's your $1 billion baby.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering how that felt at the time.
Well, at the time, I think I didn't know, first of all, I thought it was a great opportunity. I didn't think it was a grandiose opportunity that it really was. Even knowing that now, I wouldn't have made a different choice. I think throughout my career, no matter what part of it was, and even now, it's balance. Balance is huge. And I think when you work 80 hours a week, there's just no way to have balance. And whether that's with a family or if you're a marathon runner, it's balance is, or just trying to keep a healthy lifestyle. Balance is just so key.
I love hearing you say that because I do remember I was a teenager in the 80s, and I remember that the media really focused on the superwoman, right? Like she did it all. She not only could work 80 hours a week, she could have kids, and she was happy and healthy. And like we all know that that is just really difficult to accomplish without help. I was just curious, what was your experience like being a woman in the 80s in Silicon Valley?
I think what helped being a woman in Silicon Valley is that there were so many opportunities out there. By the virtue of the fact that I got 15 job offers,
Yeah.
there was a real need for skills out there. It was different. There were some managers that asked me to take pictures of my kids off my desk, and it was not the same type of generous maternity and paternity leave policies of today. I remember one company I worked for, they wanted me to, it was with my second child, and they said, well, Marjorie, informally, you can have this promotion, but I just want to let you know that it's contingent upon you coming back within 3 weeks, at least on a part-time basis. And
Wow.
so, wow, yeah, you don't have to come back full time, but at least part-time on a part-time basis. That would never happen today. It just wouldn't happen at all today. And both, also paternity, even back then, a week was generous with paternity. Never mind, it's totally different.
Totally different. I remember my daughter's 18, my older one, and I remember my husband at the time taking a week and that was it. And there was no, like, it just didn't exist. It wasn't even a question. That was 18 years ago.
Yeah, that's right.
You're one of the pioneers, I feel like, that you paved the way for many of us to follow.
By showing that you could both balance it. I think the labor market, I mean, I think there's progressive policies, but I think it's also driven by the labor market too, and the need for skills out there. So that, I think that the demand of both women and men, and I think there's a different conception today in terms of both partners equally participating, which hopefully is the reality. It's not the reality for all couples, I know. And sometimes the man does more than the woman, or vice versa. But I think that demand has really paved the way, and it's a much healthier environment now.
I agree. And I hope that for our children, right? Knowing that only 2.3% of venture capital went to female tech entrepreneurs, what do you attribute to that in 2023? That's a very paltry amount. Is it a pipeline issue? Is it a bias issue?
I mean, I think that in the angel world, it's much more than that. I don't know the exact figures of that, but it's way more than that. And it's much more than that. But I really think a first step to this is getting more angels and VCs who are women. And even one of the angel groups I belong to, one of the angel groups I belong to is the two heads of the group are women. It's Branch Venture Group. And the other angel investment group, Launchpad Venture Group, there's a good percentage of women in the group. And one of the heads of the group told me that one of the reasons why we want to have women is that, obviously, in terms of the diversity of skill set, but also when women entrepreneurs present or diverse entrepreneurs present, because there's a lot of diversity at Launchpad, we want our entrepreneurs to feel as comfortable as possible. And we want the best companies, and we want a diverse set of entrepreneurs. We want there to be a large swath of companies to look at and be able to invest. And it's irregardless of the sex, race, religion, and just to have a whole diverse candidate pool to actually get the best type of investments in our portfolio.
It's a great point that angel investing is different than venture capital. And to go back even further, right? Typically one starts with a friend and families round. I did have two women of color on my podcast. I've been following them every year. It's the second year. They did raise venture capital. They had an oversubscribed round and they came back on this year as well. They raised more capital. One of the things though that they said, and I understand this, is for them, a friends and family round doesn't exist. They don't have friends and family that have $10,000 or $5,000 or $500 even to invest. So to me, it just reminded me that there is a very uneven playing field.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's missing. I think it's missing. I would say it's less for women because women do have those connections. But if you're going to have women, I would say it exists a lot for diverse founders that may not be at a school which has a program for that because there's a lot of grants that exist, but doesn't have and wouldn't necessarily have all the connections. So that I think exists for a lot of diverse entrepreneurs because they just don't have that base. And I think that's a big hole that's out there because not everyone has the access to those family and friend rounds. And that is an opportunity for improvement. But I do think that there's different programs that are starting, and universities have this and recognize that and are putting together programs for that. For example, I'm part of the Northeastern University Venture Mentoring Network. They also have IDEA, and there's grants that go along the way. And actually, there's some grants just for women and prizes every year. So I think we're trying to address it in different ways. But I think the government could step in, and also whether that's state, local, federal government to have this available. And it's only going to be for the good. So everyone has to be able to participate. And so we can get many terrific innovations that are needed.
Do you think the Small Business Administration is doing enough? Or do you think more could be done? Because that's the only real government entity that I think of in terms of starting businesses.
I guess I really don't know. There's some entrepreneurs I know that have gotten the small business grants that are available, but that's a smaller amount. I think actually through the pandemic, there's a lot in the media about how funds were distributed to businesses that didn't need it. But I also know a lot of businesses that did need it and did need those funds, that they were able to take advantage of them and they were able to continue on. So I think that helped quite a bit.
I believe how I understand your story then is that there was another pivot, right? You're in Silicon Valley, and then your family moved to Boston for a job that you got. Presumably, it was kind of your turn, and that intrigued me. So there's like a professional give and take in your relationship. I think that that's something that's intimidating for a lot of young couples. How did you guys manage that? Was it easy?
I don't know that it was easy, but it was fair. I put it that way. I moved to California for his job, and then it was my job in terms of the opportunity and my career. And so he did the same. Fortunately, it really worked out well for both of us. So I think it's always the trailing spouse who needs to find an equal opportunity. And I think the key to that is when you decide to make that transition, make sure that whatever area you're going into, there's a lot of opportunities for your spouse. And I think it can be successful for both.
That answers my follow-up question, which is, do you have any tips for dual career couples who want to raise children and are also considering these kind of moves because it's become necessary? Sometimes, though, it's hard. It really depends on what the person is doing as to whether or not they will have a lot of opportunity in the same geography. But that's the ideal, is what you're saying.
It is the ideal. And that should be part of your decision process as well, because you're going to an area that really the chance of finding an equivalent opportunity is really low. I think the decision is to not move because it's important that both are satisfied, and that's just not going to occur.
You're a founding member of a food diagnostic startup that my understanding is provided tests for microtoxins, which you scaled to more than 100 countries. And I wondered, what was the most challenging and the most rewarding part of scaling internationally?
In terms of scaling internationally, the most rewarding was meeting incredible people that worked with you as a team to build the business. I think the challenging part was finding those individuals as part of your team to build the network. There's a lot of filtering that goes on, and it's so important that you choose the right individuals in all the various locales around the world. But the flip side of it, it's rewarding when you do, and you can choose individuals who have a depth of knowledge in that area and depths of connections in that area that can grow the innovation with you. In our case, there was a lot of education needed about mycotoxins in food. And in a lot of cases, what we did is we worked with our partners to influence some regulations, because you can't have a regulation unless you have an ability to test for a particular contaminant. So we worked with those individuals and in terms of the governments and the countries to make sure that we worked in a partnership capacity, knowing that the governments knew that it could be tested.
It reminds me today, this is kind of a shallow example, but I was thinking of how everyone talks today digitally about lead funnels and how the first thing is education. And it kind of holds true even back then. Education, what is the problem that you're addressing, getting involved with governments. It sounds also, though, like it probably was a long sales cycle.
I'll put it this way. Once a regulation's in place, it goes fairly quickly, but it's getting that regulation which will influence the sales cycles going forward. But you do have to be patient to put all the groundwork in place, both have your distribution partners as part of your team. And also, the other part is once you have the regulation in place, making sure there's culturally sensitive messaging throughout. Having you portray different images. You have to have a standard image with web throughout the world, but there's also specialized content that is very culturally part. And also, quite frankly, we have different crops. In India, there's a lot of spices. We have a lot of spice in the targeted advertising there too. In California, there's lots of almonds, so it's very much for the tree nut industry. So it's both based on the cultural aspects of it, but also the crop aspects of it in terms of what is being tested.
You grew the company with your team, and then once you grew it, you led an M&A effort, which I don't know many women who have done that, and sold the company to a multi-billion-dollar publicly held firm, right? What tips would you give entrepreneurs who are contemplating making an exit, having done it yourself?
First, hire a specialized, my preference is a boutique investment banking firm. A large one often doesn't have, sometimes it does have, but doesn't have the specialized expertise in the industry that you want. Also, in terms of the middle market, we were part of a middle market, not a $1 billion player. That's two totally different investment firms. So one that for us, it was specialized in life science, new diagnostics, and also was middle market. So that's number one. And I would make sure that you communicate to your entire team what's going on, that you're looking for the right type of partner to exit to. Price is important, but also I communicated that it needed to be a cultural fit. And I think that's really important because your members of the team, the last thing an acquirer wants is that they buy the business and everyone quits a month later. So it works on both sides to make sure that's part of it. And you have also the acquiring company, you choose one that will be transparent. It's not just receive the check and the next day and all is happy. It's what's going to go on for the next few years. And that both helps the employees of the company that was acquired. It also helps the investors of the company because often there's an escrow that you don't get your payment all when it closes. There's like 20, 30, some 40. It depends on the percent that's taken and it's released every year. So you want to make sure that the buyer gets a fair value and that the investor in the company also, that in the prior company that was sold, gets a fair shake also. And the way you do that is with a cultural match. You can't always, that always doesn't happen, but I think that's got to be part of the equation as well as the price.
I love this theme throughout our conversation of these softer skills that you're bringing up that are so important, that matter to the day to day of business, that I feel are often not addressed. So that is really nice to hear. So when the M&A happened, as the head of the company, were you then required to stay on for a certain amount of time, what they call golden handcuffs?
Yeah, I mean, the contract, it was a contract that I signed and that I would stay on. I think it was for 2 or 3 years. I would agree to stay on. And then but it was important for me also in terms of all the players in our team are important, but the often an acquirer will say there's some key players as well. It was important that those key players also had the incentives to stay on in the business too.
In retrospect, do you think, I mean, one can always second guess oneself. Do you think you chose the right time to exit?
I think we did. I do think we did. I think you have to look at, yes, it would have been nice to grow the business anymore, keep it independent a little longer, but there's also, and now I have my angel investor cap on, it's important for the investors in the company to realize an exit too. You have to be fair to your team, and part of that team is also your investors as well. So I do think so. Could we have waited and got a little bit more? Maybe, but it was also from the investor's point of view, the right time to sell in terms of where they thought their exit should be.
It's quite a balancing act. You were talking about company cultures. What were some of the ways in which you were able to merge two companies' cultures?
I think there was a lot of communication for what I tried to do, and I was pretty successful at it, was keep the existing team in place and communicate to the acquirer how important it was. I mean, all businesses are different. Some businesses are bought for products and it's immediately integrated. For us, I specifically chose a partner that would keep us as a business unit and had other business units. And that was important in the selection criteria. And that way we were able to keep a lot of our company culture that made us successful work. And I had to communicate that constantly with the parent company, because that's always for companies that have their own culture. It's not always apparent that there's another entrepreneurial different culture that exists. So I was always, that was at times it was 50% of my job, making sure that was done. But if that wasn't done, there would be problems ahead.
What were some of the cultural differences that you needed to really be mindful of? Make sure that the acquirer understood.
The biggest thing is that there's a lot of processes that exists in large organizations, and it's sometimes can be a little on the bureaucratic side, and there's stage gate processes which may be very, very appropriate for large companies, but for small entrepreneurial companies it just interferes with the progress and the actual money that's going to be made. If excessive, there needs to be definitely stages, but it's a lighter touch. And that was important that I communicate that and make sure that happened. Otherwise, they were not going to get the top line and bottom line results that they wanted and they needed for their P&L. So I had to communicate that on a regular basis.
What would you say are some of the soft skills that helped you most in your career?
I would say that I have a pretty high EQ. I think that was very important. And that really extended both to team members and also to understanding other cultures and really making sure you listened, learned, understood the drivers in other cultures and also the different processes in other cultures, something that would not be important to us, really, in the States, was very important in Asia.
Could you give an example of that? I'm curious.
In some ways, it's funny, but in some Asian countries and also in Europe, I'd say Italy, there's a lot of the relationship is really important. Before you trust and you're ready for the contract, the relationship needs to be in place. And the relationship is not so much, okay, we'll meet for dinner and we get to know each other for a few hours and then no, the relationship is a lot of visits and being comfortable. And this also occurred in the Middle East and Egypt too. I met the kids, the parents, the sisters, the brother. It was very much as well as the colleagues, the regulators. It was and it was the trust often had to be established. It was not like a dinner and we're done. It was months before that trust was established and we could really work well together. But it really paid just enormous dividends. It was great in itself to have the relationship, but it was that trust that allowed us to go forward to build a market together. And that was just so very, very important.
Hearing you say that is so different than what I think is the stereotypical American approach to business, which is, do it our way. You really had the sensitivity to cultural nuances, and that probably is more true today, I would imagine.
I think so, but I think it's probably there's more attention to that paid in the States right now. From what I see, it was the case always internationally because it wasn't them adapting to us. We had to adapt to their culture in order to be successful.
2.5 decades from one company, the M&A, and then another company. Eventually, you had done what you needed to do there. And today, you wear several hats as a mentor. I noticed a lot of mentorship, a board member, an angel investor. If you were to think of your time like in a pie chart, how much would you say you allocate to each?
I mean, mentor, board member, about 25% in terms of the writings, another 25%, and the rest would be part of the angel world, looking at scouting for deals, looking at deals, participating in scouting events, participating in discussions about whether we should invest or not. That's kind of how I would divide it out.
You also have said, you wrote an article in 2022 about, and you mentioned this earlier in the episode, work-life balance. And that's something you've always really advocated for. So how does that present itself in your life today?
I was a competitive swimmer, and then now I'm a swimmer. And I have my standard poodle next to me, and she gets me out walking every day. So I think it's important. And certainly we knew about this in the pandemic. And there was a lot of things closed. So we really got to know the outdoors and were able to walk. And there was a time where swimming pools were closed. So what I incorporate both walking and also swimming into my everyday routine. That's what I do on a regular basis. It keeps me in balance and healthy and all's good.
I could not agree more. After a good workout, I feel like one's mindset is completely changed sometimes. Like things that might stress me out after a workout don't really quite bother me as much. It's interesting how that happens.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. And that's also why when I could, some days I could not, but I structured some exercise in the middle of the day. It's exactly to your point. Things are just like sometimes reach a crescendo, and sometimes that was at 11, 12, 1. It was flexible in terms of where my schedule was. I tried to incorporate that every day. And then everything was good. I was able to go back, concentrate better, and be more productive.
That is so true. And I think you had raised this point in the article that really by having work-life balance, employers are also getting much more productive employees. So it's a win-win.
It's totally a win-win and much more productive and healthier employees. So it affects health costs. And yeah, it's the right thing to do.
What are three things that you would tell a female entrepreneur today that you wish you had known at the start of your career?
I would say how important grit is. Grit is huge, and you've got to be able to realize that there's going to be some valleys ahead. It's going to be hills and valleys throughout. So keep going. Don't be discouraged. If there's a challenge ahead, you will get through it. I would say focus. It's something that I did do, it just intuitively. I did focus on your product, your service, what your differentiator in the market, concentrate on how large your market could be. And I'd say the importance of getting the right team and team members. I think earlier in my career, I was not as good as I am today. I mean, you learn things along the way. At the end of my career, I think I had about a 90% batting average in terms of people I brought on the team. Earlier, it was a matter of just a learning curve in terms of selecting the right people, because that's so very important. And if it takes a little longer, it takes a little longer, but keep the position open until you find the right person.
On that note, what are some of the lessons that you learned about how you were approaching people early in your career versus later?
Before, it was very much, it was more skill set, and skill set is so very important to have, and I still look for skill set. But what's equally or in more important is that the person is the right fit for the position. If a person has to learn a few skills along the way, that's fine. So maybe you get 70% what you want in skill set, maybe versus a 90%, but the right hire is the one, what I've seen from my experience, with 70% of the skill set, but 100% the right person for the position versus vice versa.
And to your point, that you also then have something to aspire to and grow into, right?
And absolutely, that's right.
That would be very motivating. I want to end it with, I know you're in life sciences and health, and you focus a lot in those areas. What is exciting you in 2023? What are you seeing?
I think there's a lot out there in life science, but I think I'll focus on the diagnostics and the innovation in diagnostics that's out there. I mean, I am a board member at QSM Diagnostics, and I love animals. And so the fact that one can do diagnostics at home is pretty cool. It's amazing. Also, immunotherapy is just incredible. And gene therapy, that's going to change into one of the companies I invested in is Torigen, which helps dogs who have cancer, and it's doing extremely well. It's based on immunotherapy, and it basically boosts the survival rate of dogs with cancer at a third of the price. So this is just incredible. We don't have to go to a specialist to get that. It's incredible. But the same, that's for dogs, but this is happening in the human clinical area as well, with various immunotherapies and gene therapies. I mean, it's an exciting time in life science.
And do you think that you mentioned they cost a third less? And I think that that is a huge issue with healthcare right now, that so many people that need it can't really afford it. Do you think that there is going to be more of an awareness of that over time? I mean, I know that you're one person of many, but I just see a lot of dissatisfaction with the healthcare industry in general, which I realize is different than what we were talking about before.
I think it's got to be reckoned with time. And I also think what needs to be reckoned with also is the expense. I mean, there's exciting immunotherapies and gene therapies. I'm talking about the human clinical area, not the veterinary technology area, but who's going to pay for it? It's an exciting innovation that may cost a few $1,000,000 a year, and it can cure someone. But how is this all going to work out from a payment side?
It's so interesting that you say that, and then we'll end with you letting listeners know where to find you. But I worked with a PhD in pharmacology very early in my career, and she had worked for a pharma company. And I spoke to her about, I was troubled by the expense of medications. And she'd said to me at the time, what you don't realize is that what you're paying for are the 9 drugs that were very expensive, that had to go through trials that didn't see the light of day because they didn't work out. And then I don't know if that is a justification or not, but it was an interesting perspective that I hadn't thought of before.
I think that is true, and it takes a long while to develop that. In Boston, Vertex is developing some amazing things but again, where's the price tag? Who's going to pay for that? And I agree that it does take a while, but I also think the US bears too much of a burden for that. There's not a reason why the expense of drugs should be so much more in this country versus other countries. I think we've got to do a better job. Still keep the innovation going, maybe have some innovation pay or have government participate in that, just like they did with vaccines. But as far as the overall cost, there shouldn't be that much of a differential between the cost of what we get in here versus Italy or Germany or Spain. That just it's a big differential.
Yes, absolutely. It's been so nice speaking with you, Marjorie. Where can our listeners, if they have a life science company that they would like to pitch you or ask you a question about their company, where can they reach you?
Send me an invite on LinkedIn, and I'm happy and very open to speak to people about their innovation.
Thank you so much for coming on She Ventures.
And thank you for having me.
You've been listening to She Ventures. Like what you heard? You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and sign up for our newsletter so you never miss a show.